Hi, I'm Rosemary Armao, and this is On the Brink. And in this chapter of On the Brink, we are talking about journalism heroes and maybe not so much heroes. I'm a little confused on whether I admire or hate some of these people we're going to talk about. With me is Drew Sullivan. Drew is an amazing investigative reporting and a news entrepreneur. We've worked together for years. I was his boss. He was my boss. Hell of a journalist, and he knows the crime world and the journalism world quite a bit. So, what do you think of Julian Assange? I've gone back and forth on him. When he first came out with Wikileaks, we thought it was a great idea that all government records should be open. How could, as a journalist, you be against that? And then we thought it wasn't such a good idea. And
Well,
then go ahead. Go ahead. We'll give them more of the background later. You want to jump in? Go ahead.
no, it's just I think we learned, as we were going along, what works and what doesn't work. I mean, it was kind of a new thing that was happening, and WikiLeaks was a new idea. I mean, it was radical transparency. It was,
Right.
it sought to change things in a way that was fundamental. And I think, a lot of journalists were pretty sympathetic to that and thought it was, potentially a good idea, but it was very quickly that we realized there were some problems with this approach. And I think even Julian Assange, to a certain extent, figured that there were some problems to this approach.
Well, his early work was in collaboration with very traditional news outlets like the New York
Right.
Times, The Guardian, and they did the sort of vetting and editing that he was opposed to. Do you remember? They would take out
Right.
like the names of the innocent third parties. They would tone down or edit just things that were dangerous. That because he was dealing with deep secrets, with state secrets, and he didn't like that. And basically, he's an asshole. So he wasn't very nice, right? I mean, he was not very nice in his objections to that. And he
Well,
maintained again that there should be no censorship.
yeah, and that's not an uncommon held idea by a lot of people in the tech area and kind of tech activists. And that's really what the problem that journalists had with Julian Assange was he really wasn't a journalist.
Right.
He claimed to be a journalist, but he didn't
He's
really
still claiming it. That's the basis of his defense
yeah,
right now.
because the journalism cloak is a nice one, to have around your shoulders when you're trying to argue for things. And so, journalists are often heroes, and so putting on that journalism cloak is a well kind of it demonstrates to everybody that hey, this is working in the public interest. But I don't think it really was because what we kind of realized as journalists was that it was causing a lot of damage that
Right.
there's a difference between activism and journalism. And this was
Right.
really kind of activism more than journalism. Because a journalist, one of our responsibilities is to really mitigate harm. We're supposed
Mm-hmm.
to do the stories in a way that causes the least amount of damage. And I think, in the first Afghanistan leaks that came out, that was really, a great project that really highlighted that they were randomly killing, a lot of Afghans,
Right.
in situations, where there was really a war crime. But then, as Assange insisted on, much more, access to the people on the records, then people started going through and finding information on individuals, and their lives and careers were destroyed. And I had some friends
Right.
who suffered, they were, people in the US government, they were people who were talking, to the US government, they were
Right.
people
Right.
who had
We,
the
we had a story right here in Albany when he released the cables, the diplomatic cables. It was a kid who was protesting the Iranian government. Thought pretty brave to do that. Had gone into Istanbul after to avoid arrest and had given up a whole lot of stuff. And in the cable itself, it says his name must never come out. He'll be targeted if it is. And Assange ran it, and the name came out. He basically had to be spirited out of the country along with his fiancee and his mother in order to avoid being killed, being hanged by the Iranians. That's the sort of thing that should have been edited out. But what
Yeah,
got him into trouble with the American government, Drew, has been he took all kinds of documents, military and otherwise, from Chelsea Manning, military
right.
secrets, and he printed them.
And he put them out and he made them available to everybody, and he made them to foreign governments, and he made it to, everybody to go and look at. And the problem is that, again, there were people. I had a friend who was an advisor to the Pakistani government, and on
Hmm.
military affairs, and his honest opinion of where they were on some stuff came out in those cables, and he was fired from his job,
Yep, yep.
and that,
Harm. He
yeah.
did not. He did not minimize harm ever.
And he was not a public figure, and his story was not relevant to the world,
Right,
and it was just destructive. And OCCRP, my organization, and ICIJ, we did projects starting around that time where we actually kind of came up with a different approach, learning from what WikiLeaks had done, which is to build a large consortium of news organizations, to give them access to the data, and to make it widely available, so as many different news
right,
organizations as possible with different viewpoints had the ability to go through the data and do
right,
stories. And
right.
so it wasn't kept secret in the sense that a lot of different reporters who we had no control over were able to look at the stories, but we mitigated the damage to the individual.
Right, right.
And I think really, and Assange got quite angry and came out publicly against us
Oh
during
yeah,
the time, saying that we were, bad people and everything, and that, his model was better. But I think history has really demonstrated his model was not better,
it
that
was not. It was not. So now what he's in trouble with, of course, from the US government is they've charged him under the Espionage Act for getting the secrets from Chelsea Manning from the military and exposing American wrongdoing in Iraq. And he has been in hiding for years now in the Ecuadorian embassy and then in prison in Great Britain. And the US government is in a fight to get him extradited back here so that he can face what looks to be maybe a life in prison. His health is bad. Apparently, his mental health is bad. He has become suddenly the champion of people who are against torture and journalists who are saying that if he is punished, terribly punished under the Espionage Act, all of investigative reporting will be chilled. Do you see that?
I do. I think what's happening to him is not fair. If you look at a similar case, Daniel Ellsworth, in the Pentagon Papers, he did suffer repercussions for what he did, but the New York Times didn't. I mean, there was
Right,
no
right.
coming after the New York Times. Manning made a choice. It was a heroic choice. He saw evil being done, and he outed it, and that's fair, and he'll have to pay the price, but he has, or she has, and
Yeah,
now,
she's been pardoned, so she's out now. She had a 35-year sentence.
right,
So, but
right,
she's out now. Well, it's interesting that some experts think that Assange's case could call into question the other part of the Daniel Ellsberg case. Ellsberg went to jail until he was also eventually released. But the reporters under the Supreme Court ruling were told, no, as long as you didn't help to get the information, you didn't steal it yourself, you could print it. And Assange's case, they could end up, this court could rule, if this ended up, if he goes to trial and it ends up in the Supreme Court, this different 6-3 conservative court could say, no, no, if you got stolen material, reporters, you can't print it. We are in danger of losing that great protection.
right, and that's why I think a lot of journalists, think that the charges should be dropped, against him, and you would hope that the government is just doing this to get him, and then once they get him, they'll actually be pretty light on him, but to kind of demonstrate that you don't do this. But it's wrong. And part of that, I think, is that Assange isn't truly wearing that journalism cloak. He really is, an activist. And that is an issue with journalism, because activists and journalists are really hard to distinguish from each other nowadays. There's a lot of
Right.
organizations. I mean, Bellingcat is a good example where it's really a hybrid of journalism and activism. You know,
Yeah, and that brings us to Alexei Navalny, who is absolutely a political activist, one of the, until his murder or death, we don't really know, one of the most outspoken opponents to Vladimir Putin. But he also ran a journalism organization. He did do journalism.
yes.
So, what is he a hero? Do we love him? I certainly admire him.
I mean, I don't think anybody's a hero or not a hero. I mean, Julian Assange, I think one of the problems with him is, he's, a narcissistic character who has kind of made the situation a lot worse.
Much worse.
Yes. And the
Along with the United States, he's wanted in Sweden for rape. He cut off the tops of condoms he was using because he's a narcissist who wants like 100 children. He's
exactly.
weird.
Well, it's a grandiosity, and
Yeah.
and I think that that's made him, more of a challenge. He's also, been, his allegiances to the West have been called into question. People say he's actually a Russian. That he's paid by
Agent. Yeah.
Russia for the leaks that he's put out. The Clinton stuff and other things.
Yeah, he's been implicated in the hack of the Democratic Party and Hillary Clinton's emails, which helped to shield Donald Trump from his Access Hollywood bad publicity. So we don't really know. I don't think that's been definitively proven, but
It's
Roger
not.
Stone was involved in it. He must have been.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of, some of the journalists he works with are known Russian assets. And so, it is problematic. And so that's also, I think, made it really difficult. When your personality and when your life is more important than all of these things, you create conflicts and problems that are beyond what the original set of problems were. In Navalny's case, he really was a a democratically inclined activist. And, he used investigative reporting as kind of a means of getting out the story about Putin. And so, but he was really beloved for his stands, and his investigative reporting was more kind of just something that he helped, make the case, for why Putin was corrupt. But there's plenty of good
Yeah.
investigative reporting on the corruption of Putin, those out there as well. So he was kind of following along. But all of this stuff is a really slippery slope, and it's dangerous to journalists because
Yeah.
we get kind of lumped into this activism crowd. And the journalism itself is changing because we're now dealing with really fundamental issues. I deal a lot with Russia, and people say, well, you're anti-Russian. Well, the Russian government is promoting something that means the death of not only democracy but journalism. So,
Yes.
is it wrong to be against something that will destroy democracy and journalism? I mean, there are evils that are so bad that you have to call them evil. And
We
so,
are talking about, I'm sorry, I have to interrupt you. We need to take a short break. We are talking with Drew Sullivan, an expert on investigative reporting, international reporting, corruption, you name it. He can talk about everything. And we are going to talk about that and more in just a minute. Our Mayo on the Brink is brought to you by the Donna Frank team of Berkshire Hathaway Home Services, Blake Realtors. That's a mouthful. But Donna is super impressive. We met when she worked at WAMC as a crack fundraiser. And since then, she's moved on to become also crack, a licensed real estate salesperson. Last year, she ranked as the top agent in the capital region. If you need honest answers about your real estate, check in with her. You are going to be impressed too, I promise. You can reach her at, this is the email, DonnaFed, DONAFED @gmail.com. I love our sponsors, and I want to tell you about two more of them. One is Pine Valley Press of Williamstown, Mass. It was founded way back in 1979. Go here. I'll give you their website in a second. You can find here and even order the music of David Keckley. He is the composer who put together those segments that you hear at the beginning, the end, and in the intervals in our podcast. We get numerous comments, usually almost always compliments about that music. That's Pine Valley Press, all one word.com. Check it out. And one of our first sponsors, still with us, has been Peacock Potts Pottery. That's a tongue twister for me. They offer the unique work of their founder, who is engineer turned artist, Ona Papageorgiou. You can check out the pictures of what she is capable of. It's really remarkable. At, again, all one word, peacockpots.com. We're back with Drew Sullivan. We've been talking about the difference and the increasing closeness of activism and journalism. I want you to talk more about that, Drew, and tell the story of Hadija, who was one of our colleagues when we worked together in Eastern Europe. She is an Azerbaijani journalist.
Yeah, Hadija is a wonderful investigative reporter. She got her original training with OCCRP. She became a regional editor who worked with us. She did some of the most important work on really showing that the first family on Azerbaijan were corrupt. They were, before she started working, they were considered the friendly Muslim country,
Right.
the friendly rich Muslim country. They have a lot of oil. They have a very high standard of living, for at least the people who live in Baku. But Hadija started showing how the first family was really controlling large parts of the economy. They controlled the major, telecom companies. They controlled a lot of the, hotels and the businesses. And she did a bunch of stories on this, and that, of course, angered the government. And at a certain point, she became, I think, a bit of an activist when they started to really come down hard on her. They filed charges against her for her work at Radio Free Europe, saying that she had avoided taxes. They claimed that she was harassing one of her employees and encouraged him to commit suicide, and a bunch of really trumped up charges. And she ended up getting into a series of legal scrapes with the government, which increasingly got worse. And during that time, Hadija really kind of transitioned from an investigative reporter to a freedom fighter. And she spoke out heavily about, corruption and about, the failing democracy that was in Azerbaijan, and what the first family was doing. And she spoke in very compelling ways, but in a sense, she became, I guess, in journalism parlance, you would say she moved from an investigative reporter to a commentator. And so, her work was not so much about journalism; it was about holding out these values. And
she's the first person I thought of when I heard about the Navalny case, because in both those instances, they had a way out. Navalny did not have to go back to Russia from Germany after they tried to poison him. Hadija could have come out and worked with you, did not have to go back, and both felt compelled to go back. And at that point, to me, they felt like patriots, freedom fighters, if you will, more than journalists. And I don't know how I feel about that. I admire it. It certainly took a lot of courage. It was brave. It was inspiring. But you've always argued, and argue it now, that they might have done more if they had stayed out and done journalism.
So that's what I tried to get Hadija to do. I encouraged her to leave the country. And my logic was, I knew what would happen. I mean, first of all, she was sentenced to 7 years in prison. And then, she served about a year and a half, and then she was released. But she never really took up journalism again. She became, a trainer and a kind of I would say, a political activist. And she had done so much for investigative reporting, and there are not that many investigative reporters out there. And there's very few people like Navalny who really have the ability, his videos would get millions and millions of views. and were incredibly impactful in Russia. Um, and both of them really had an incredible voice, and they were rarities. You can find people to be activists, to sit in prison and go on hunger strikes, and I mean, those people are pretty. They're much more common than investigative reporters,
Yeah, yeah.
and that's my. I see it as such a difficult. It's so hard to find these people. I think their responsibility is to the people to continue doing, and that means not getting to take the heroic, step of going
To
back and
become the hero. Yeah.
yeah.
Well, let me bring up Ronan now. He worked for a publication that was targeted by the Russians. Brilliant investigative reporter. He did leave.
Roman Annan, yes. So Roman Annan runs iStories in which is now in Prague, and he was in a similar situation where his organization was going to be shut down. He was hearing from his sources he was going to be arrested, and that he could spend a number of years in prison. And his first thought immediately was, not only I'm going to get me out of the country, I'm going to get all my journalists out of the country, and we're
Yep.
going to relocate the organization to a place where we can do unfettered journalism. And that was really his decision. And we can't. It's difficult because until you're in that situation, you don't know what decision you're going to make, and you don't know what pressures are on you. But I think the issue with Navalny and with the issue of Hadija is by then they were really figures in their, they were huge public figures.
They became the story.
They became the story. And in that situation, you lose that status if you take the weak move, if you
Yeah.
decide to leave. So that would have been very damaging to Hadija and to Navalny to not, stay, not go back. And I
Hmm.
think Roman Annan is not a well-known, he didn't have that kind of social pressure. He wasn't considered the social mover that Navalny and Hadid.
Well, his boss, though, Dmitry Muratov, does have that status. He was a Nobel Peace Prize winner a couple of
Mhm.
years ago, and he shut down the publication because after the Ukraine invasion, he could not have written anything, he said, without endangering his people. So he
Right.
made a decision, also heroic, I think, although not quite as showy as Hadija or Navalny.
And Novaya Gazeta is operating outside of Russia now. And so
Exactly.
they have a European branch, and they're operating. And so, you never know what decision you're going to make until you're in that situation. There are lots of pressures on you. There's family pressures. Hadija's mom was sick at the time.
She
She
died while she was in prison. They wouldn't let her out.
exactly.
They wouldn't
And
let
so,
her travel, rather. Sorry. Yeah.
right, it's very difficult to say how all these things fit in.
Do you
And
have
so
to be a hero to be an investigative reporter or a reporter in your part of the world?
I think you need to be somebody who's willing to sacrifice a lot of comfort, a lot of sense of security, um, and in some cases, freedom to do the work that you're doing. I think the people that I work with are my greatest heroes because unlike the Hadijas or unlike the Navalnys, they're not known. Even Roman
Mhm.
is better known than most of the reporters that we work with. In fact, if you ask most Americans, name the top 5 investigative reporters,
Oh, they
you
can't.
they'll say Tucker Carlson or
Ah,
you know,
ah.
they'll, they'll come up with these really bizarre, answers that have nothing to do with investigative reporting. And so, and even, people would say things, you know, TV presenters, are the, investigative reporters. They're not. They're just reading the damn story. You know,
Mhm.
the nobody knows who the investigative reporters are, and it's usually because you're not doing it because you're looking for the fame. You're doing it because you love the story.
Go ahead. We have to take a break. We'll be back in a minute. We're talking to Drew Sullivan, founder of the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project. I want to thank you, as always, for listening to On the Brink. Let me tell you about some of our sponsors. I'm so proud of their support. The Apple Barn and Country Bake Shop on Route 7 in Vermont is closed right now. It is winter, you remember. They're closed until March 15th, but plans are already underway for a big spring reopening, new festivities. I understand mimosas may be involved, along with the donuts and pies that they're famous for, the Apple Barn. So keep an eye on their website. It is theapplebarn, all one word.com. You'll hear and see announcements there. Karen's Place, Karin, is a gorgeous retreat. I've been there and visited on 22 acres out in Vermont, rural Vermont. It's available for rental for everything from weddings and family reunions to corporate conferences. It's close to city centers around here, but you would think you were in another country. It's beautiful. Go to www.karensplacevt.com. Thank you. Please subscribe to an Armao on the Brink. This doesn't cost anything and it really helps us out a lot. You can just go to the podcast platform of your choice and follow their instructions to subscribe or follow or like and rate us. The more you do that, the more sponsors that we can end up getting. And that gives us a chance to do more and more extensive programming, which I would really like. I think you would like it too. I also have to tell you about something new we have coming on later this month, an On the Brink website. This is a place where you will be able to interact with me and our guest panelists, get background information on the issues and the topics that we bring up. You can make suggestions, render complaints even. You can hear my rants. And I have a lot of opinions, you know. A weekly podcast just can't contain them all. So watch out for our upcoming website. We're talking about investigative reporting, how it's different from whatever it is that Tucker Carlson does and Anderson Cooper. And one other misconception, aside from the job of investigative reporters, is what a leaker is. They're not seen as heroes, and sometimes they are. Or sometimes what they do is really confusing to us in the public. So with that, Drew, you work with leaks a lot. You've done some of the best work at OCCRP has come from amazing leaks. Tell us about that.
Working with a leaker today. Leakers are difficult. And, to be honest, we don't ask a lot of questions about what their motivations are because we, in some senses, don't care what their motivations are. What we're going to do is we're going to take their leak and we're going to look at it very carefully. And if there is a public interest in what they've given us, then we'll do a story on it. If there's an important public interest, and we will protect the information in there that is not of public interest. So a leaker is basically somebody is going to give us information that we can use and exploit for good investigative reporting. And as to their motivations on all these things, they usually tell you, I've seen corruption and I can't stand by it. And that's often true. There are a lot of leakers who really are leaking because, they sometimes, often for the first time in their life, they see that their company that they've worked at for 10 or 15 years is corrupt.
Mm-hmm.
And they are surprised, shocked, and they want somebody to know about it. And so that's the way they get people to know about it, is they leak it to a journalist. And that's great. In other cases, sometimes we're getting sourced information from organized crime figures. Sometimes we're getting it from political parties, and they don't always explain to us what their motivation is, but sometimes it's to get somebody, or it's to, get payback on someone. And, that's a motivation that is going to cause people to act. And unfortunately, we have to.
But if the information is good, you're still going to use it. If someone hacks in to a private system, but they have amazing information in the email, you're still going to use it.
Our job is,
I would.
It's for the public. Our job is to say, what is value of this to the public? What can we explain? How will it help the public, understand the world better. And so, yeah, I will use it.
So the most famous leaker in the world right now is probably Edward Snowden, who they've made movies about him, that the Pulitzer Prize stories have been done about him. He was a hero because he exposed NSA surveillance of American citizens. But he ran out of the country because he didn't want to end up in prison for life, the way Julian Assange is facing that threat. And now he's a fine citizen living in Russia. Is he really a hero? Didn't he kind of pollute his image too?
He polluted his image, yeah, by going to Russia and taking an increasingly kind of attitude, very anti-Western attitude on things. But
Yep.
you know, uh, he was right in that the stuff that he leaked was incredibly valuable, and it really demonstrated how the U.S. government had really crossed the line a long time ago,
Hmm.
and was doing things that it really shouldn't be doing, including, essentially taking advantage of large tech companies to get a lot of information they didn't really have a right to, and so what Snowden did was really important. And we're not all perfect people, and he is now, he's been chased out of his country, and he's in a country now. I don't know his original motivations for why he leaked. He's presented them in one way, but you never truly know why. Everybody's always
Right.
going to present themselves in the most heroic way. Some people think that he may have been a spy in the first place. I don't think so, but in the end, it really made America stronger, what he did. And it's unfortunate
Hmm.
that he's now in a situation where he's got to be where he is. He's a very smart person. And, it's one of those cases where I think that if somebody through a leak can demonstrate that the government was wrong, that they shouldn't be prosecuted.
There are protections in some countries for people who leak news like this. We
Mhm.
don't. No, ours are not. Our laws are not very strong on that.
Yeah, I mean, the U.S. intelligence system is incredibly powerful. It's got some amazing capacity to do things, and they seem to, whenever they want to find out something, they seem to find it out pretty quickly, which means it has capabilities that we don't even understand. And some of these were some of the things that Edward Snowden started to get to, um, and it's a problem. It's a problem that they have access to technology and access to the privacy to do all these things, and there really isn't the oversight that there needs to be, and
Right.
that's a failing of the government right now. There needs to be better oversight.
Well, I want to thank Drew Sullivan for spending time with us today to talk about journalism and heroics. We always end our shows with a toast, and I propose one today to Aleksei Navalny and to Hadija and Ronan and to all of them. Call them what you want, journalists, activists, politicians who are willing to put their lives and their reputation on the line to bring attention to injustice. We can criticize them here as we have, but you have to admire their courage and their sacrifices in standing up to power.